Hey everyone, it's Charlene Lee, and thanks Jay for the message. I'm just a little bit late this morning. I'm actually streaming live from a client's offices, so took a little bit of extra time to get ready today. But I'm very excited about what I'm going to be sharing, which is about the future of AI, especially generative AI, and also exploring some of the reasons about why it is feeling so disruptive right now. And I can say, as somebody who has been following technology now for 30 years, 3 decades now, that this is probably the most disruptive time that I've ever experienced in looking at technology and business and on all the implications, especially for us as people, individuals, and society. And I say this from having been starting in after business school in 1993 in newspapers, which were being disrupted by this thing called the internet, talking about the rise of search. I looked at the rise of social media and now at those disruptive technologies on AI. And it feels really, really different and exciting and anxiety provoking for a lot of different reasons. And I want to explore what are some of the reasons for this. Really looking at the opportunities that are being created by AI, and then also the key things around what are some of the downsides also as well, which is leading to the sense of disruption. And I like what Jay says here. Yeah, it's the Y2K of 2023. So that's a very great way to talk about it. So a couple reasons why this feels so disruptive. And I do want to say, let me just put up my questions for all of you. Please share something you've done with generative AI. So it could be with a Bing search, if you have access to Bard, if you are been using Chat GPT 3.5 or 4.0, and talk about what you've been doing with it. And honestly, the more mind blowing the better. Please share your experiences. I'd love to hear, again, from a researcher's perspective, what are you doing with it? What are you exploring? How are you integrating into your life on a daily basis now? I don't know about you, but I'm using it pretty much every day. I have it open on my calendar all the time so that I'm able to use it whenever I need to. And the number of searches I have on it are just amazing to see the history of what I've done. So, a couple of reasons why things feel disruptive. And again, this is looking over a history of studying disruptions. And first of all, it's of course new technology that's coming in that's oftentimes causing that disruption. It's not always new technology. It could be, well, just name all the things that have been happening over the past couple of years: a pandemic, war, energy crisis, supply chain. It goes on and on. But when you look at some of these disruptions, all of them do two things: they shift the way that we relate to each other. Something has shifted to our status quo. The disruption takes our normal and shifts it into a different place. And the reason why it feels so disruptive is that the way that we have conducted ourselves, the way we communicate, the way we exchange money, the way we do business has been changed. And in particular, there's a shift in power. Who had power before? Who now has power? All those things shifting is what really causes the sense of disruption. And with generative AI is especially true because now we have the power to do things that we could never have done before. We can write things, make pictures, create code. I'm coding for the first time in my life, real true coding in Python and creating applications, which is just mind blowing to me. And so these are new senses of power, of capability, of ability that we didn't have before. And that shifts the balance of how we relate to each other. So that's why, in many ways, why people are feeling so excited about AI, but also really apprehensive. What does this mean? How is this going to change things? Because we're experimenting with it today, but what is it going to look like in the future? So, a couple of things. David says here, let's see what he says. AI is a tool. Learn how to interact with it and use it. Absolutely. And I think we're at that stage of exploration right now, David. What can we use it to do? I'm having it plan vacations, the meal plans, exercise. Again, I'm having it code some apps that I've always wanted to have, and no one can make them, so I'm going to make them for myself. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the other things that it can do and some of the things we're saying. So, a couple of specific reasons why generative AI feels so disruptive right now. First of all, there is this unprecedented creativity. The fact that you can put something in and huge amounts of information come out in really well formulated fashions. And again, this is the engine that a GPT is built on, that it is using all of that transformer technology to be able to understand and piece together words. And it's the way I like to say it is that 3.5 GPT 3.5 was like a really articulate high school student, college student, and 4 is like a PhD, being able to come back to you with some really smart information, just really well formulated. In any case, it's just really well done. It's created with confidence and really well put together, in much the same way that you would expect from somebody who's polished and accomplished. So it's interesting to see this creativity come through because it shortcuts in so many ways that heavy lifting that we've had to do in the past around research. I hold it as a standard that if I can find the answer on GPT, then I, as a researcher, I, as an analyst, need to rise one level higher. Because if people can get the answer from GPT, then why do they need me? I've got my job just got significantly harder to do as somebody who does research in all of these spaces. So it's completely changed the game. We need to up our game as humans to be adding more intelligence and creativity than these amazing engines. That's exciting and also creates a lot of anxiety. The rapid pace of development is mind blowing. I've been playing with this new GPT, Auto GPT, and then also the baby AGI, autonomous general intelligence. So this whole idea that you can have an autonomous agent playing with you, and people were just putting together some scripts, not even companies. And just in the past week, these new things have come out to actually make autonomous agents possible. So we'll talk a little bit about that in just a second. I'm curious if any of you have heard about AutoGPT and have had a chance to use it. And I'll be talking about that more next week too, as well. The potential for job displacement and for industry transformation is tremendous. And then finally, there are huge amounts of ethical implications, and we'll talk about the downsides and the concerns that people are having. So let's see. Let's talk about what some people are using this for. Okay, so Mark has been having conversations with ChatGPT to do a public lunch before others. For example, was it a competitive advantage? Was it safe? And the answers are measured but illuminating, Mark shares, acknowledging jumps on the competition and understanding it may not be totally safe at this point. I don't know about you, but this whole idea that GPT and this generative AI tends to hallucinate. In other words, they tend to make up stuff because it sounds good, not because it's right. And so I was talking to some researchers at Stanford where they're talking about how do we train our generative AIs to have humility, to know and to be transparent about when they're really confident about something and when they're not so confident. If you dig down into GPT, you can actually filter with the API. How confident do you want the answers to be? How creative do you want them to be? And the test is if you ask GPT the same question multiple times, does it come back with the same answer or does it come back with additional tries to try to get it, quote, right for you? And you can move that little slider back and forth depending on how reliable you want the answers to be versus how creative you want it to be. So it's really interesting to see how, again, how much we are trusting these as the answer coming out. Jay has something, is sharing, he's using ChatGPT 4.0 to analyze pros and cons of, well, all of these different platforms, Bard, Palm, Bing, which is, I think, hysterical to be able to do that. David is sharing at present time one of the most opportunity-rich times in history, similar to the horse and buggy, to the horse's carriage. The only thing constant is change. So true, David. Great comments here today. So Marissa says some folks in genealogy are attempting to use it for deep research. Attempting because it harkens to last week's topic about AI concerns. When fact-checking the AI research, they found it's made some fill-in data. Yes, and so one of the big questions is What are the data sources being used? There's not a lot of transparency in terms of what's happening. If you use some of the AI search engines like u.com or Perplexity, who's a new search engine, they actually show you what the sources are and give you backlinks to give you an idea. And I think that level of transparency is going to be something that's required going forward to build trust. Uh, Jay says also that this can be really empowering. Our former hegemonic resources are challenged, access to information is democratized. I'll talk about this in just a second, in that uh, this power shift is really interesting. And you've been reading some of the news reports. Places like Google, when ChatGPT was launched, went, oh, red alert, everyone. We need to get on board with making sure that the franchise known as Google Search is being advanced at the same pace. And so they're making a lot of efforts around that. So let's see, I'll come back to some of the concerns that people have. But I want to go down and talk a little bit about some of the very specific things that I'm seeing emerging. So when I look at the opportunities and the downsides, the opportunities are really understanding what's changing in the landscape. And I've been speaking with quite a few business leaders in the organizations over the past few weeks, just saying, and they keep asking, so what do we do? What do we do? What do we do with all the stuff? Everyone's using it in my company. I'm using it, having a great time. What does this mean for my business? What are the things that we should be doing as an organization to be proactive about this rather than let it kind of walk in the back door, which is what's happening. And one of the things that I've always come back to when you look at these new opportunities, they're motivated by either greed or by fear. And again, that goes back to what I shared last week about consumers. We're excited about all the things we can do, the things that we want to be able to do. So the greed part of it. But we're also fearful about what the implications are here. And so I do believe that having a balanced approach to think about the opportunities that are there that are being fed by our fear or by our greed is really important to understand what are the motivations behind this and to start mapping out where are the critical areas inside of your organization, inside of the work that you do on a daily basis, where AI can play a significant part, especially the generative AI that's based on chat, because it's so easy to use. The interface is just words. And it could be typed words now, but it could be spoken words very, very quickly. And so the thing is that one of the ideas here is, imagine if you could have a truly intelligent co-pilot or somebody like a digital assistant, a chief of staff. And we'll go into this more next week because I do believe that this is going to happen within the next year. It's happening so quickly. We will have digital assistants working with us side by side. And the idea is that a general artificial intelligence means that you can put that AI to a task and it would be able to do it. And it's somewhat like if I were to ask somebody, a colleague, an assistant, if you could ask that human to sit in front of the computer, what would you expect them to be reasonably able to do? And the thing is that you would learn over time with feedback. It would feel like it's a person, a human or entity who could learn your preferences over time, be able to ingest information from anywhere. So it has access to all of your apps, all of your data, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. And it uses natural language interfaces and processing instead of graphical user interfaces to get things done. Imagine where you don't have to find and peck and look for the right button and link, and then so you can just tell it to do something. So the idea here is that artificial intelligence could be my teammate, could be my colleague. If I'm starting a business, could be my co-founder who takes on a lot of those things. And I have somebody I can go back and forth with. And how comfortable are we with that? How excited are we with that? Has a lot to do where I think this future is. But I do believe that that future is here today. Those arguments about whether ChatGPT is general artificial intelligence, most people would say somewhere in there. Not quite there yet, but getting very, very, very close. So when you have this general artificial intelligence that can do anything for you, not just task specific, it changes the game in terms of that flexibility and the ability for that entity, for that AI to be able to be supportive of everything that you do. So, some of the implications for this are, for example, the skill comes not from having knowledge anymore. The skill comes from being able to ask really good questions and to train the AI to learn from you. And the difference between these autonomous agents and what we have today with ChatGPT is that the chat is limited to learning within the chat you have. And the more you chat with it, the more it kind of gets confused, frankly, because it's hard to keep track of things over a long period of time. But if there could be another companion that sits alongside the AI and actually helps guide it and feeds it information based on your preferences and how you want to do things, it can take that learning and use it again and again over time. So a couple of things there, and I just want to finish out some of the other implications. The idea here, for example, is that uh, all that knowledge and information of how to do things, where things are, things that sit inside of manuals or inside of trainings or inside of FAQs. Those things would just sit inside a repository of knowledge, and then you'll just have to access it. I'll give you an example. I really dislike my CRM. And it's not because the CRM is bad. It's just because I don't like having to enter my contacts, track the activities, and then be able to update them and then set reminders and all those things. I just want to be able to get off a call or finish an email and know that it's inside of my CRM and that it knows what to do with it because I have certain routines I have to do. And I can just tell my AI to log this into whatever CRM it is, create a contact, log this call, and be done with it instead of having to go through and peck and find the directions and wherever it is. So that is a completely different way of using content, using applications, and the ways that we actually design and make software in the future. I think it'll be really, really different because of these new interfaces. So those are some of the kind of implications I have around that. I want to go and check and see some of the things that people have here. All right, so we have some comments. Wow, so many good comments here. So let's go with David here. Nothing coming out of the lab is going to be foolproof and finished. Just like any software, there are updates and corrections developed in real time. And that is so true, David. And unfortunately, people are using these faulty, flawed models to make real life decisions. And that's some of the downsides we'll talk about in just a second. We aren't necessarily aware that these things may not be right, that there are biases built in. And so that could have huge implications. So while I'm excited about all the experimentation that's happening, I'm also really concerned about how we're using these early tools today, right now, to make real life decisions that have implications on people. Let's see. Mark Evans shares, in terms of school, my kids are scared to death of ChatGPT, concerned teachers will fail them for cheating. And I think we're going to see a revolution here where using AI tools to do research, to write papers, will be seen as cheating. Versus, how do we think about this as the ability to use GPT, to use general intelligence to be tutors? That you would write a first draft and you would put the ideas in and then have this conversation going back and forth. I think the really, really good teachers right now are experimenting with ChatGPT in the classrooms to do personalized education for some of the students who are really gifted and want to go faster. So they can give them assignments to use and program and teach them how to use these tools. And they also have time then to develop lesson plans for students that have learning differences. I have a child who has dyslexia, and he had to learn to read in a very different way, learn to write in a very different way, needed these very different tools. And now for him to be able to use GPT to write first drafts, to structure things, because he doesn't literally have the ability to do that, allows him to get over that first hurdle and onto the more creative aspects. What are the thoughts that he wants to put down? But to use a tool to fill in that executive function skill for him has been a life changer. So the things that I think we are looking at are ways of rethinking the heavy lifting of what we have to do. And in the same way that you would not expect people to, again, handwriting and cursive is not being taught in schools anymore because typing has replaced that. And so we need to be able to write at a basic level. Having beautiful cursive handwriting is not necessarily something that's a given these days anymore. So a couple of other conversations here. We have from LinkedIn user, a great conversation, my observations. And when we need your help, people cannot define generative AI. That's a great point. There are no guardrails. We have over dependency on software companies to develop the guardrails and a natural tendency to be pulled into a hype cycle versus pragmatist mindsets. So a couple things here. First of all, define generative AI. And the other thing is the other GAI, general artificial intelligence, defining that. I was having a conversation with the Google engineer who first said that the Google Lambda was sentient. How do you define sentience? So there's an interesting thing here. Uh, so one of the key areas that I think is important is understanding not just the technology defining it, but I think more importantly, saying what is it being used for? Again, that very pragmatic approach to this is thinking about what are, I don't know what it's called, but this is what it's doing. So rather than try to define something that is being literally changed overnight, I literally wake up with my hair on fire, like, what's changed overnight? We want to be thinking about what are the implications for that. And so I'm spending a lot more of my energy around thinking about the other questions that you have around what are the guardrails going to be. And then what's interesting is that the technology companies are asking for and calling for better regulations and guardrails because they want that collaboration to happen. We see governments like the EU, the White House are coming out with some very good, I think, really well thought out guidelines that now need to be translated into what actually happens at these technology companies, but also very importantly, inside of our established organizations, how do we start putting the guidelines in place? And I'll talk about that in just a second. So, David Dinkins, I'm glad you like my example of CRM. I can't stand working with CRMs. They're absolutely necessary, but just really have a hard time with that. Lisa, I see you had a mention here because Jay is talking about it, but I don't see it in here. So, but I think that's a great point about Y2K comparisons and the hype. Actually, let me just go back to the hype cycle here. I feel sometimes I'm adding to the hype cycle, but honestly, I think it kind of deserves it. The key thing here isn't to talk about how it's going to be great, how it's going to be amazing. I think as long as we're looking at these new developments and go, wow, look at what it can do. What are the implications? What are the upsides and downsides? And be very realistic about it, very pragmatic about how this is going to impact our businesses. And to never just look at the bright, shiny object of things, because that's when we get into hype, thinking this is going to change the world. I do fundamentally think that this underlying technology, and especially the speed at which it is being adopted, that is absolutely real. It's hard to talk with anybody who is, working on computers, who hasn't used it, who hasn't tried it, has heard about it, and frankly been blown away by its power. So this is very, very real. A couple other comments here. I'm trying to get through them as fast as possible so we can go through some of the downsides. Bettina, great comment here. Privacy and security by design, extremely important function to protect intellectual property and personally identifiable information in any organization today. Therefore, making AI available for innovation while also fostering a culture of privacy and safety governance and best practice would be critical to prevent harms and increase accuracy. So that is an excellent point. I want to go use that as a jumping board into some of the downsides. Now, sometimes we think about one of the biggest dangers of AI being mass unemployment or that an Uber AI is going to take over the world. That's not actually, I mean, the AI destroying the human race. That is a definite possibility. But I think the biggest issue is that we make mistakes, that we are with this great power also comes great responsibility. And are we thinking about the responsibilities that this power gives us? So, for example, let me find my notes here. We could be, again, concentrating a lot of power in the hands of people who can make decisions with faulty data. We could be reproducing systems of oppression that have existed, and we're not necessarily aware of that. We could be damaging our information ecosystem with, again, faulty data and information if AI is building on top of AI and this faulty information. And then also, if you think about it, it is taking a huge amount of energy. So our natural environment ecosystems are going to be impacted by this. If we want to have our own digital autonomous agents, it's going to take a lot of computing power, a lot of electricity, and other sources that are going to, again, just really challenge our existence in this world. So I think more than anything else, this is about really what I started out with is how do we think about using this power in a responsible and ethical way? I've talked about this and I'll say it again. This is really about having transparency and accountability at the foundations, and then being able to put inside principles of fairness, of privacy and security, as Bettina mentioned, of reliability and inclusiveness, ensuring that in our organizations, if we're going to use AI to make decisions, we should be asking, should we be? We can, but should we be? Knowing the quality of the data and, frankly, knowing the limits of our ability to take that information and use it in a responsible way. So I'll give you an example. Hiring people. We have the ability today, we've had this for a while, to be able to screen candidates based on their backgrounds. And sometimes we screen it based on their education. Is that a fair way to do that? Is the fact that you have a college degree make you more qualified than somebody who has a practical experience of 10 years doing this? And does that automatically disqualify somebody who doesn't have a degree? Now with AI, we can actually look at skills more so than not, but also how do we look at these skills and weigh them back and forth against each other? The words that we use to describe those skills may be different depending on different cultures and backgrounds. So all of these issues come to bear, and it makes us question the fundamental ways that we look at the world. And I think that's what's so disruptive about this technology. It makes us really test because it's sitting there right in front of us. How do we make decisions? How is the information gathered? And without the transparency of how these AI tools are gathering the information, we have to be extra, extra careful before we start using them. So one of the I'm just going to go through. Elisa, I just realized you're the LinkedIn user. Thank you so much for clarifying that. So let's see. I have a couple other questions here. Jay asked a really darn good question. So who's an expert? Who's an expert in this space? Is the AI the expert? Is the person asking the question the expert? Really good philosophical questions. Let's see. Jay also has an issue and raises a good question. As China's developing their own AI, large language models, what are the censorship guidelines that are going to be inside of those guardrails? And frankly, this also applies to also the idea that when we're developing our own AI tools, right now they're fairly general, they're fairly open source. As I'm able to start writing open APIs to ChatGPT, to GPT, or start creating my own using a general intelligence against my own data, to what extent do I be transparent about what's included? Could we have a right wing and a left wing and a central list GPT where you can get pre-filtered information based on information that's already in that database? How do we know what's in there? It could be a really popular thing, but now the engineers are starting to shift that basis. They're starting to shift the algorithms that drive what actually gets shown. And we're trusting that people are doing this in an open and transparent way. So, and I think this all comes back to how do we know what's real, what's not? And Crystal, and I'm going to end on this, is how can we know if people are applying the skills they are learning? That's a really good point. And this is what I think is fascinating. We can tell because I'll just give an example with coding. I can type in my code, use it, throw it into the engine, and it'll correct itself. I didn't write the code, the engine wrote the code and it's correcting itself. But if I write something, and I do this now, I take something out and I put it into GPT and I go, what's not clear about this? Would an eighth grader, that's my standard, be able to understand it? Would my mother be able to understand it? Am I writing in a clear, concise way? It'll come back and give me feedback as an editor would. So I'm using it to generate content. I'm using it, I'm then applying my own filters and edits to that, adding my own things, and then spitting it back in to say, give me feedback on this. So I could ask an editor. I have editors, I have copywriters who could do this, but I can also ask an engine that takes the best of that learning and be able to give me real-time feedback in waves. Now, that doesn't replace these really valuable discussions I have with my editor about the structure, about her pushing me on behalf of my readers to think deeper, further, faster. I don't trust GPT to do that for me. I trust my editor who knows me, knows what I'm capable of doing, and knows when I'm falling short and when I'm not pushing hard enough. ChatGPT is not going to do that for me, not yet. But someday it might. And I look forward to that day to see what actually could happen and transpire. All right, so that's what I have for today. Next week, I'm going to be continue this conversation. I was going to talk about something else, but I'm really excited about Auto GPT and baby AGI. Again, autonomous general intelligence, and the idea that these could be autonomous digital agents. Again, this is so new. I just started playing with it, so I didn't want to talk about it today. But by next week, I'll have a better idea of what it's doing, what's capable of, how it's developing. I've been diving deep into the world of digital assistants because I'm really passionate about having one for myself. And I'll be sharing some of those ideas. I encourage you to go and play with some of these tools out there. And again, as always, please reach out to me if you have ideas, questions about this emerging space. We're all discovering it together at the same time. So until next week, stay safe out there. It's crazy. Do amazing, mind-blowing things with all of these new technologies. Stay safe, keep your organization safe, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.